Sir James Frazer's classic treatise, The Golden Bough, gives us a very useful model for analyzing magic, science, and religion. Frazer observed that while all three are means by which human beings try to satisfy their needs, they operate differently. The religious approach is the simplest. A supplicant begs the god or gods to make the change and waits to see what happens. There might be a bribe involved, some sort of sacrifice, but the gods are fickle. Sometimes they oblige, sometimes they don't. Science and magic, on the other hand, are expected to get dependable results. Fickle gods don't come into it. Science and magic depend on natural law. Know the law, apply it correctly, and get the outcome you expect. Let's look at some examples. Say I'm a farmer struggling through a dry spell. If I'm a religious farmer, I'll pray to the rain god and maybe sacrifice a chicken or two. If things are really bad, maybe I'll crawl to the rain god's shrine on my hands and knees, fasting all the way, and sacrifice something costlier, like a goat. Well, it still doesn't rain. Clearly, the rain god is really pissed. I try to figure out what I did to offend him. I mend my ways. I continue the prayer and sacrifice. Eventually, my prayers are answered. It rains. Next, let's try a scientific approach. Based on natural laws of thermodynamics and whatnot, I arranged to have silver iodide crystals dispersed in the clouds. The silver iodide's crystalline structure induces heterogeneous nucleation. Water droplets freeze and precipitate out of the clouds. Sometimes it rains. Sometimes it doesn't rain. If it doesn't, though, I don't reject the scientific laws that formed the basis of the attempt. I just assume that conditions weren't quite right, or the laws weren't correctly applied. To tell the truth, I don't have a clue what heterogeneous nucleation is. I leave that to professional scientists. A couple of days later, we try again. And it rains. Okay, that time, I guess we got it right. Now, let's try magic. First, the shaman scratches a miniature representation of my cornfield in the dirt, making it look as much as possible like my real cornfield. Then he adds some soil and straw and seed from the real field. And then we both stand up on stools and pee on it. If you think that's a ridiculous approach to rainmaking, that's because you're unaware of the natural laws of magic, sympathy and contagion. You see, if B looks a lot like A, then A and B are in sympathy. And whatever happens to B happens to A as well. Also, if B incorporates things that have been part of or in close contact with A, they're connected by contagion. Again, whatever happens to B also happens to A. So that little representation of my cornfield is connected to the real cornfield by both sympathy and contagion. And since the human spirit, or animus, is similar in kind to the spirit of the rain, when we urinate on the model, rain should fall on my cornfield. It's all very reasonable and really quite elegant. The only problem being that the laws of sympathy and contagion don't actually work. Nevertheless, when it doesn't rain, I don't reject the laws of magic, which I don't really understand anyway. I trust my shaman. He's an expert. He tells me that the conditions weren't quite right, and maybe I drank beer the night before instead of water, so the sympathy wasn't strong enough. Anyway, we try again a couple of days later, and that night it rains. Great. This time we got it right, and the magic worked, just as we knew it would. This is Milton Friedman, planet Earth's most influential economist for the past 40 years or so. He died in '06, but his disciples still are out there spreading the word. Friedman maintained that economics is a real science, not some crummy social science like, say, sociology. He'd found the natural laws, you see, very reasonable and really quite elegant. Academic economists, of course, wanted to believe. They were tired of never hearing economics and science in the same sentence without the word dismal tossed in. They wanted some respect. And that's what Milton Friedman had to offer them. Naturally, it didn't hurt at all that Friedman's policy prescriptions were just what the rich and powerful wanted to hear. Greed is good. Government is bad. Privatization is good. Regulation is bad. Wealth is good. And taxes are bad, bad, bad. But, you know, we really shouldn't be judging ideas by their emotional appeal or their elegance. Not if what we're after is science. We should be looking for ideas that can be verified using scientific method, or at the very least models that are a good fit with our collective experience of reality. And so we ask, was Milton Friedman a scientist or a witch doctor? Perhaps you disagree. Well, let's do what Uncle Milty failed to do and examine the evidence. And there's plenty of evidence. Case in point, the entire 19th century. Back then, unrestricted capital brought about a vast concentration of wealth in the hands of very few, vast numbers of people living in abject poverty, widespread corruption in government and the co-opting of democratic institutions, the sale of substandard, dangerous, adulterated products, the degradation of the natural environment, the outrageous growth of monopolies, and the use of war as an instrument of economic policy. A far cry from Friedman's capitalist utopia. More recently, we've had out-and-out experiments conducted by Friedman and his Chicago school disciples, starting with Pinochet's Chile and Indonesia under Suharto. There were plenty of other experiments with Friedman's shock therapy around the world, and they all turned out pretty much the same as the 19th century. A tiny elite group controlling all the wealth and all the power, and huge numbers of other people, people who used to get by, shoved down into untenable poverty. An even better example is what shock therapy did to Russia. The new capitalist class drives around Moscow in their armored Mercedes limos, protected by private bodyguards. While for the rest of Russia, life expectancy is down, the population's dropped by 10%, and the streets are full of homeless children. The Friedmanites never doubted their laws of economics, though. They just insisted the privatization and deregulation weren't radical enough, weren't complete enough. The conditions weren't quite right. Somebody drank beer instead of water. Magical thinking. Real witch doctors usually believe in their own magic. But according to lots of our old movies and comic books, there are some witch doctors who don't actually believe in all the mumbo-jumbo, just use it to gain power and wealth. You know, evil witch doctors. Lately I've been thinking there just might be a few of those kicking around.